The murders of Jan Kuciak and Martina Kocnerova sparked a wave of public outrage and mass demonstrations across Slovakia. The protesters demanded justice for the victims and an end to corruption and impunity in the country. They also called for the resignation of Prime Minister Robert Fico and his government, which they accused of having ties to shady businessmen and mafia groups. Fico initially resisted the pressure and tried to appease the protesters by offering a reward for information on the killers and by reshuffling his cabinet. However, his coalition partners threatened to withdraw their support unless he stepped down. Faced with a looming no-confidence vote in parliament, Fico resigned on March 15, 2018, after 10 years in power. He was replaced by his deputy, Peter Pellegrini, who formed a new government with the same coalition parties. The resignation of Fico and his government did not satisfy the protesters, who continued to demand a thorough investigation of the murders and a complete overhaul of the political system. They also expressed their distrust of the police and the judiciary, which they suspected of being influenced by powerful interests. The protests were the largest in Slovakia's history since the Velvet Revolution of 1989, which ended communist rule. Some estimates put the number of participants at over 100,000 in Bratislava alone. The protests had a significant impact on Slovakia's political landscape and public opinion. They boosted the popularity of anti-corruption parties and candidates, such as Zuzana Chaputova, a lawyer and activist who won the presidential election in 2019. They also eroded the support for Fico's party, Smer SD, which lost its majority in parliament in the 2020 general election. The election was won by the Ordinary People Party, Olano, led by Igor Matovic, who campaigned on a platform of fighting corruption and reforming the state institutions. The protests also increased the awareness and engagement of Slovak citizens in civic and political issues. They inspired many people to join or form new movements and initiatives, such as For a Decent Slovakia, which organized most of the demonstrations. They also encouraged more journalists to pursue investigative reporting and expose wrongdoing by public officials and business elites. The murders of Kuciak and Kocnerova were a tragic event that shook Slovakia to its core. But they also triggered a remarkable response from the Slovak people, who showed their determination to defend democracy and justice in their country. The trial of Marian Kocner and Elena Zusova was one of the most controversial and closely watched cases in Slovakia's history. Kocner, a wealthy businessman, and Zusova, his associate, were accused of ordering the murders of investigative journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kocnerova in 2018. Kuciak had been reporting on Kocner's alleged involvement in corruption and ties to the Italian mafia. However, despite the testimonies of 3 other men who were convicted of carrying out the killings, Kocner and Zusova were cleared of all charges twice by the Specialized Criminal Court in Pezinok. The first verdict, delivered in 2020, was overturned by the Supreme Court after a public outcry and an appeal by the prosecutors. The second verdict, announced in 2023, was also met with disbelief and anger by the victims' families and supporters, who walked out of the courtroom in protest. The judges said that there was not enough evidence to prove that Kocner and Zusova had masterminded the murder plot, even though they acknowledged that the crime had been committed. They also dismissed the confession of Zoltan Andrusko, who acted as a go-between and claimed that Zusova had told him that Kocner had ordered the murders. The judges said that Andrusko's testimony was not credible and contradicted by other witnesses. Zusova, however, was not completely exonerated. She was found guilty of planning to murder 3 prosecutors who were investigating Kocner's business activities. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison for this charge, while Kocner remained behind bars for another crime he had been convicted of earlier. The verdict sparked outrage and criticism from many quarters, including journalists, activists, politicians and international organizations. They said that the verdicts showed a lack of justice and accountability in Slovakia's judicial system and undermined the public trust in the rule of law. They also called for a thorough investigation into the possible interference and manipulation of evidence in the case. The prosecutors said that they would appeal against the verdicts again and seek a new trial at the Supreme Court. They said that they had enough proof to link Kocner and Zusova to the murders and that they would not give up on seeking justice for Kuciak and Kusnerova.